Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this Monday?
New week,
yes,
ready to go.
That's
and
right.
Fortunately, we have a special guest to start off the week.
Absolutely.
And that is good. And he's calling long distance. I think he's calling in from Amsterdam.
Yeah.
I think that's across the pond somewhere. I don't know exactly where there was. Even though I've been in the service and traveled a lot in the Air Force, for some reason, they never had me land in Amsterdam. But anyway, we have a special guest that I'm impressed with his resume. But first is, he sounds like he is devoted to the cause of liberty, and that excites us. And the second thing is I don't know enough about Europe. And like I said, I've never been to Amsterdam and to the Netherlands. So it's great to hear that there's life for liberty in Amsterdam. So I want to introduce our special guest, who is a writer in politics, written some books here. Let me just put this up briefly so the viewers can see this, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But his name is THjeUg9y3cWT, and he's in their parliament right now, and we're delighted to have him with us. But we do know that there's much that we're going to agree on, and we love to see the message of liberty spread, not only in the United States, but we definitely need it spread around the world, or we'll all suffer. So I want to go ahead and introduce Siri and ask him to say hello to our audience. Siri, welcome to our program.
Thank you very much. And Ron, it's such an honor to be on your show. You've been a hero of mine for so many years, and to be able to speak with you today is just awful. It's great. It's awesome. It's great.
Daniel?
Well, it's great to have you, Terry. Thank you so much for joining us. And you were kind enough to send us a copy of your recent book, The COVID Conspiracy, which Dr. Paul held up. I heard it sold a couple copies over in Netherlands. That's good to hear. But now it's over here in the U.S., and I like this kind of cross-partisan because your preface is by Steve Bannon, who's on the right, and then you have a nice little quote from RFK Jr. about the book on the back. So, it's beyond left and right is what we're all about. But, a lot of our viewers...
I was just thinking, with some luck, my book has the recommendations of both the presidential candidate on the Democratic side and one of the key strategists on the Republican side.
It seems like he understands a little bit about politics. Siri, what I want to start off with is I'm always interested in people who find the message of liberty fascinating, and we get excited about it, and people have different reasons for reaching that point. Tell us a little bit, in a brief way, how you came to the point where you are right now in the understanding and the desire to spread that message.
Yes. Well, thank you very much indeed for that opportunity. So I was the only elected politician in the Western world to have opposed every element of the COVID lockdowns, the semi-forced vaccinations, the social distancing, all of it. And during that period, which started in 2020, and that's what the book is about, how I experienced it, I experienced the real workings of power of what you may call the deep state. So I was very much part of the mainstream conservative establishment, and I noticed that most of the people that I was working with were very willing to sacrifice individual liberties of citizens in order to remain part of the club, as it were. And I was standing there on that precipice, on that point where I had to choose. And I chose to defend the liberties that were being taken from us on an unprecedented scale. And that's what the book is about, because the thing that followed from it was that I was being expelled from all the centers of power. I was being demonized. I was being marginalized. And that is how difficult it is. That's why the story tells about much more than just all the scam elements of COVID, the untruths. It also tells a little bit about how power seems to seduce so many people into suppressing citizens and just joining the club. And I never wanted to do that. I paid the price for it, but I also wrote about it so other people can learn from it.
You know, Thierry, a few years ago, Viktor Orban in Hungary, an old friend of mine, was not a common name in the United States. He has since become very, very well known, especially on the American right, for lack of a better word. I do get the feeling that you are about to break here in the U.S., and that's why we're excited to have you on the program. Just a prediction, because you defy these traditional left-right stereotypes, which we can't stand. But I really would. The book is a great book. It's a quick read. You won't want to put it down. But for the benefit of our viewers who aren't super familiar with yourself or with the book, maybe if you wouldn't mind just giving us a quick rundown of yourself, what brought you to write the book and what the book is about.
Yeah, so I'm 40 years old. I'm married. I live in Amsterdam, and we just have a small son whose name is Lancelot, and he's 11 years old.
Congratulations.
And I'm recording this from my Amsterdam home. You can see the street here a little bit. I grew up as a legal scholar. I did a PhD in political philosophy with the late British philosopher Roger Scruton. And then I started writing for newspapers. I became a television commentator. But gradually I felt myself becoming more and more at odds with the establishment, with the mainstream establishment. I've published a number of books, also romance novels, but I felt that we needed to do more. So I founded an action group, which is called the Forum for Democracy. I founded it in 2014, which was just about the period when the British people were talking about Brexit. And I've been an opponent of the European Union and a defender of sovereignty for all my life. So I felt we needed to set up a group here in the Netherlands that was going to fight for a referendum, a Brexit-style referendum in the Netherlands. And I gathered a lot of signatures, and I started organizing events and debates. So this was all back in 2014, 2015. And the government at some point said, okay, we're going to make a law that will make it possible to get an actual referendum if you get a real great amount of signatures. It was 300,000 signatures, and if you get that number, then we're going to help you organize a referendum. So in principle, it was already a great success, which I achieved back in 2015. And then immediately I started with a couple of friends to try to get as many signatures as we required, and I was one of the people, and we succeeded. So I was one of the people that was in the lead of the referendum that the Netherlands held. Not a lot of people remember that anymore, but in 2016, right a couple months before the Brexit referendum, the Dutch had a referendum on the extension of EU membership to Ukraine. Which was a topic which obviously became very, very important later. And we won that referendum. I was one of the people leading in the camp of no extension, no further extension of the EU. It will make the continent ever less free, more bureaucracy, less easy to govern, less democratic transparency. And so we won the referendum by almost 2/3 majority. But the Dutch government ignored it. And Prime Minister Rutte, it's very, very astonishing. And he said, look, I've taken the advice of the Dutch audience and the Dutch public, but I'm not going to listen to this. So I felt this was now it was personal. This was something that I couldn't accept. So I decided either I'm going to leave the country, I'm going to do something else entirely, I'm going to start a business, become a farmer, you name it, or I'm going to cross the Rubicon, as it were. And that's what I did. So in the summer of 2016, I founded my own political party, which was also called Forum for Democracy. And in 2017, at the general elections, I got elected. So I became a member of parliament. I'm the leader still of the Forum for Democracy. My party is the largest party in the country, in the Netherlands, in terms of members. So we have the largest membership figure,
Oh.
and we organize events all the time. And we're very different from every other political party because I'm very involved with society. So we have set up a school, an elementary school. Because in the Netherlands, and I'm sure the same is true in the United States, young children, and I feel this very urgently because I have a son myself, but young children are indoctrinated with this wokeist agenda. And they are being promoted to accept transgenderism, and they have to be, vegetarian days and climate aware and all
Right.
that thing. And I do not want that for my kids, and a lot of people in the Netherlands don't want that for their kids. So we've had a tremendous success setting up our own school. I've set up a publishing house. I've now set up a business, a small business, that supports the farmers, because the farmers in the Netherlands are under terrible pressure. And we take the food directly from the Dutch farmers, put it in boxes, and send it to consumers in the Netherlands that wish to support the farmers. So I'm doing more than just parliamentary stuff, and I write obviously, but I think it's really, really important to have this societal network, this little platoon, as it were, that we're building up.
Yeah, I think what you have done a good job in proving that one person can make a difference, and it's a great story. Most of the world knows that we are in the middle of an election, and it'll be a big election next year, and there's a lot of politicking going on. And the way I see it from our viewpoint here is, COVID is still an important issue, and I know you had a strong opinion about that. Ukraine is an ongoing special issue, and there's a shifting of attitudes here in this country. And also, the big issue, I think politically, and this is my opinion, that probably immigration is going to remain one of the top issues that the people are dealing with, and it stirs up a lot of emotion and a lot of unhappiness. And I'm sure you have an opinion on that, and I want to see if I can get out of there and look at this immigration problem first in a theoretical reason why maybe countries have a right, to have rules and regulations about entry into a country, and why, for practical reasons, this is very necessary.
Yeah, so the Netherlands, obviously, being part of the terrible EU, doesn't have the right to protect its own borders anymore. And if you don't protect your own borders, you're fundamentally not a country. We've seen the influx in the Netherlands of hundreds of thousands of migrants every year. And we're talking about the Netherlands is a country of currently about 17.5 million inhabitants. So these are serious percentages, and it adds up because every year new immigrants come in, and they seriously put pressure on the social fabric of our society. And the sinister thing about it is, and that's perhaps also where the COVID story blends in with the climate change story, blends in with supranationalism, and blends in with migration. All these issues, they are part of the same mega trend, as it were, where we as peoples forming organic communities with one another are being played out against each other by having these incredible numbers of immigration, which no society could possibly sustain, and then having rulers, mostly supranational rulers, international rulers, that step in and say, look, we're going to fix this for you. You just raise the taxes, just have more and more police control, have more and more gated communities and people not living open lives with one another. You get low trust societies, and the government, the officials, the ruling class, as it were, profits from that, because from all that insecurity and all those societal issues comes a mega state, a corporate class, a managerial class, as James Burnham would put it, that will regulate our lives up to the tiniest detail. And that's the demonic element in it. So it's not just something that, hey, look, we need to limit this because otherwise we're going to have too much crime, we're going to ruin our businesses and so on. It's also something that the government takes advantage of.
Daniel has a question.
Yeah, Thierry, if we can, let's go back to March 2020. And for me personally, I would say that's where the world as I knew it ended, and it has not come back. And I think you know what I'm talking about. How did they do it?
You mean March 2020?
March 2020, yes. How were they
Yeah,
able to shut the entire world down and change everything that we know?
Yes, well, indeed. And the funny thing, the interesting thing about that date is that it was, these policies were implemented in all our several countries. So it was definitely a coordinated thing. It was not, we had all these national press conferences and these national parliamentary debates, but ultimately the shots were called at a different level.
And they all said the same thing. They all said the same thing, exact same thing.
Literally the same thing. And they all had the translator for the deaf at these press conferences. That was also a new thing because it helped to give people the impression that a national emergency was at hand. It was all, they played on our fears in such an immoral way. It's incredible. So you asked the question, how did they do it? And I think the most important thing for people like us to understand about how the machinations of power are, how these things are actually working, is scenario planning. So what they're doing is they've got all these scenarios that they are thinking out. Like, for example, a pandemic scenario. There have been about 10 consecutive repetitions of what the world would do, when a pandemic would hit, in the case of a pandemic. And all these government officials and big corporations and journalists, they were all present at these simulations. And what happens is that across the board, you get elites, you get people in positions of power who have already a sort of general sense of what am I going to do in case A happens or in case B happens. They've got all these scenarios already in their head. Big financial crisis, an alien attack, you name it. Whatever they are, whatever scenario, hack attack, the breakdown of the internet. What if Russia attacks Ukraine? How are we going to respond? And almost without realizing it, almost without knowing it, national elites are groomed in that way by the international nomenclatura, by the international deep state, the global deep state. And they are primed to respond in the right way. I've sometimes said, the funny thing is, you don't even have to bribe them for them to do exactly what you want them to do.
This issue of borders and immigration is huge, I think, throughout the world, certainly huge in this country as well. But if you compare this to the other problems that I mentioned, we have the pharmaceutical problems, the COVID, we have Ukraine, we have general economic problems, inflation, and it affects it. How do you place this whole idea about borders and immigration? Is that a number one issue? How big is that? Or is that just going to be one of three things that people are going to be talking about? Where do you place that issue?
I think it's one of several issues. I think the left is going to talk a lot about climate change and environmental issues in the coming years. I think the right is going to address the issue of immigration, but obviously is not going to dare to talk about the real taboos, the real issues that are underlying the immigration discussion, because the right is too afraid to do that. I think CBDC is a massive thing, the protection of the soundness of our money. I think that is something that is being overlooked largely by freedom-loving people, but we have to talk about how our wealth is being stolen from us through inflation. I think that's a major issue. And then I think geopolitically, you were saying there was a shift in the approach of the Americans towards the conflict in Ukraine. And I think that's about time. And I think the multipolar world order is upon us. And we need to really start thinking seriously about what that means for almost every element of our lives.
Right.
Well, one of the things we're seeing here, just on Ukraine for a second, is a lot of the U.S. neocons who push this from the beginning. And this is what they do every time, Thierry, and I know you know this, from Iraq to Syria and et cetera. If you had only listened to us and gone in harder at first, we wouldn't be having this discussion. So in a way, it smacks of desperation in a way, because it sounds like they know they've lost. But I want to take you to a piece, and I'm sure you read it, but it came out yesterday in Politico Europe, and I just happened upon it, and I thought it was absolutely hilarious. It's called Springtime for Europe's Fascists. And it's a fascinating article on many levels. First of all, I think because they recognize the danger of what's happening in Europe, and they're trying to contain it. And it talks about the AfD at 20%, Rassemblement National 1% point below, being the number one party, FPO in Austria, your party as well. I think they're trying to ban your party from the Netherlands, which I guess what they may do in Germany next. But what is most fascinating, and maybe you can comment on this, is what does it say about the parties in power in Europe that are supporting literal fascists in Ukraine, that they have to condemn those of you, your parties that are against this support, they have to condemn you as fascists? It seems almost like an exercise in gaslighting.
Yes, but there's more to it. It's very interesting and important to understand that our understanding, the mainstream understanding of the world, has been shaped dramatically by the Frankfurt School, which was a school of thinkers that originated in Germany in the 1920s, 1930s. It relocated to the US, and these thinkers believed that actual fascism, Nazism, and the Second World War essentially were an inevitable outcome, an inevitable consequence of traditional family life, traditional patriarchy, traditional European culture. And the thinkers of this movement, of the Frankfurt School, were incredibly influential in shaping, for example, the denazification program that America implemented in Europe after the Second World War. They were instrumental in setting up political science faculties around the world. They've shaped our cultural life, they've shaped our journalistic life, our understanding of psychology, and the destruction that we've been seeing ever since of European civilization, European aesthetics through modern architecture, the makeup of our societies, the ethnic and social makeup of our societies through mass immigration, sovereignty, being proud of your national history, the traditional family, the destruction of the traditional family through wokeism and LGBTQI+. All that comes ultimately from the philosophy of the Frankfurt School thinkers, who believed that traditional European life was ultimately going to lead to another world war, mass extinction of other peoples, the conquest of land, all these horrible things associated with the Second World War. And that is why the Ukraine is doing so much in trying to show off as being progressive. That's why they have an LGBT regiment in their army. You can look this up. You can check this. They have an actual LGBT regiment in their army. I don't think they're going to have a lot of military success, but it has a certain propaganda issue. It's important to present Ukraine as the anti-fascist, the progressive, the non-binary nation vis-a-vis Russia and Putin, which is increasingly positioning itself as a defender of traditional Europe.
I don't know whether this new
So-
policy with the military will be helpful or not. It might lead to more peace. There won't be anybody know how to fight a war or something. But I wanted to touch. I want to touch on the economic policy. You briefly mentioned it, and even the problem that people face with inflation. But if I try to simplify this, you could break economic policy down to, what we claim in this country. They've been the economists and most members of Congress have been taught Keynesian economic or central economic planning by noble bureaucrats who know what's best for everybody. And then you have the outright socialists. We have those. But then there's the other group. I was just wondering whether there's groups over in Europe that or in the Netherlands, which identify themselves as Austrian economists, believing, you mentioned, I think, sound money. Is there a group like that? Do you see it ever in the literature? Do they talk about gold being used again in the monetary system? Because some of the oil people are starting to trade in oil rather than gold. What do you hear about that school of thought in economics?
As far as I know, my party is the only party in Europe which is explicitly Austrian in its economic outlook. We are, with my publishing house, we're also publishing a book about the Austrian school, and we're organizing classes where people get educated in von Mises and others. So I think that's extremely important, and I've been a defender of the gold standard for a long time until I discovered Bitcoin, which I think has the potential of rivaling gold. And I discovered, Ron, that we both feel very strongly for a man who is imprisoned in the US for popularizing Bitcoin, whose name is Ross Ulbricht. And I think it's very, very important that we continue to defend his cause as well and call for a presidential pardon for him, because he absolutely deserves that.
Yeah.
Right, Daniel?
We're getting close to our cutoff time, but I want to ask you one last question, Thierry, if you will indulge me. And that's sort of a general question. We see now that the narrative is broken down on Ukraine. We see it every day when even the U.S. mainstream media is admitting that all of these things they had been telling us along this last year or so was a lie. Same with COVID. Where do you see this going? How is it going to unravel? What's it going to look like from your perspective?
Well, the most likely is probably that it will be a frozen conflict. I don't see any way in which Russia is going to lose this war. But the question is NATO going to accept defeat, or is there going to be some kind of stalemate, and then perhaps it will take another 5 or 10 years? I think ultimately the battlefield of Ukraine is the battlefield for or against American hegemony. And the sad thing is that although I feel very, very deeply connected with the American people, and I think the American Republic is a wonderful thing, I think the American empire has largely worked against the interests of the American citizens as well as the citizens of the West as a whole. I think this war was entirely unnecessary. Russia has been provoked into it. It never wanted it to happen. And it's still calling for peace talks on a weekly basis. So it also depends, I think, who wins the presidency. If Biden or any other deep state candidate somehow manages to secure another 4-year term, then it's unlikely that America is going to back down, because we know the hawks and the military-industrial complex are so deeply involved in the current White House. But if either President Trump returns or RFK Jr. comes into the White House, then we might very well see a dramatic shift in the mood, and if peace talks recommence, and if America and Europe find a way to reconcile with Russia and see how our common interests and work together, then I think we might have a very bright future. So I think a lot depends on what happens next year in the United States elections, actually.
Very, very good. We will have to close down, but I do want to remind our audience that I think this type of a program is so important because it's a small world when it comes to the type of weaponry is around and how there's so many international organizations. And guess who gets, it's my opinion, it gets squeezed out, and that is the individual. That is why, Syria, I think this is delightful for us to have you with us today and talk about, you know, some very positive things that are happening. But if they want to follow what you're doing, do you have the Forum for Democracy? Does that have a website that some of our viewers could tune into?
Absolutely. So we have fvdinternational.com. That's fvdinternational.com. I can be found on Twitter. It's Thierry Baudet it's at Thierry Baudet. And of course, if people are interested, they can order my book at amsterdambooks.com or on Amazon or on Kindle.
Wonderful. And I want to thank all our viewers today for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed the program as much as I have. And please return to the Liberty Report soon.